Hello friends, if you want to watch super hit movie, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always in English, then you must like this video if you are visiting our channel for the first time. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel's MTV Friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by ZemTV. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it. All the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, starcast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends. So let's start the video. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is a 2020 drama film written and directed by Eliza Hittman. It stars Sidney Flanigan in her acting debut, Talia Ryder, Théodore Pellerin, Ryan Eggold, and Sharon Van Etten. It had its world premiere at the Sundance Film Festival on January 24, 2020. It was also selected to compete for the Golden Bear in the main competition section at the 70th Berlin International Film Festival, where it won the Silver Bear Grand Jury Prize. The film was released in the United States on March 13, 2020, by Focus Features. It received widespread acclaim from critics, with praise for Flanigan's performance and Hittman's direction and screenplay. Plot: 17-year-old Autumn Callahan suspects she is pregnant and goes to a crisis pregnancy center. At the center, she takes a drugstore test that confirms she is pregnant. She is told she is 10 weeks along, given literature on adoption, and shown an anti-abortion video. After learning that she cannot get an abortion in Pennsylvania without parental consent, she tries to induce a miscarriage by swallowing pills and punching herself in the stomach. When those methods fail, she tells her cousin Skylar that she is pregnant. Skylar steals cash from the grocery store where they work, and the two buy bus tickets to New York City. On the bus, they meet Jasper, a young man persistently interested in Skylar, even though she tries to blow him off. At a Planned Parenthood clinic in Brooklyn, Autumn learns that the Crisis Pregnancy Center lied to her about how far along she was and that she is actually 18 weeks pregnant. Though she is still able to get an abortion, she must go to a Manhattan clinic the next morning to have it performed. Autumn and Skylar spend an uncomfortable night riding the subway and playing games at an arcade. The next morning at the clinic, Autumn learns that a second trimester abortion is a 2-day procedure and that paying for it will take most of her funds. The counselor also asks her a series of questions about her sexual partners that reveal that Autumn's partners have been physically and sexually abusive. Out of money, Skylar realizes the two have no way of going home. As Autumn asks Skylar not to call either of their mothers, Skylar reaches out to Jasper, who takes them bowling and to karaoke. At the end of the night, Skylar asks Jasper to lend them money for their bus tickets, and he agrees. Skylar leaves with Jasper to find an ATM, and Autumn later goes looking for them. She finds them kissing. Realizing Skylar is only doing it for the loan, Autumn discreetly grabs Skylar's hand to comfort her. In the morning, Autumn goes to her appointment and has the abortion. Autumn and Skylar go to a restaurant where Skylar asks her questions about the procedure, which Autumn answers tersely. The two then ride a bus back to Pennsylvania. Cast: Sidney Flanigan as Autumn Callahan, Talia Ryder as Skylar, Théodore Pellerin as Jasper, Ryan Eggold as Ted, Sharon Van Etten as Autumn's mother, Kelly Chapman as social worker, Kim Rios-Lynn as anesthesiologist, Drew Seltzer as manager Rick, Carolina Espiro as financial advisor. Production: in April 2019, it was announced that Sidney Flanigan, Talia Ryder, Théodore Pellerin, Ryan Eggold, and Sharon Van Etten had joined the cast of the film, with Eliza Hittman directing from a screenplay she wrote. Adele, Romanski, and Sara Murphy produced the film under their Pastel Productions banner, while Rose Garnett, Tim Headington, Alika Portnoy, and Alex Orlovsky executive produced the film under their BBC Films and Tango Entertainment banners, respectively. Focus Features was slated to distribute. The film was shot in New York City and Shamokin, Pennsylvania over 29 days in February and March 2019. Release. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always had its world premiere at the Sundance Film Festival on January 24, 2020. It was released in the United States on March 13, 2020. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the film was released on video on demand on April 3, 2020. Focus debated re-releasing the film theatrically, but was concerned about competition once theaters reopened. It was released through video on demand in the United Kingdom on May 13, 2020, after being initially planned for a theatrical release. Reception. Box office. In theaters, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always grossed $891,027. Critical response. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 99% based on 238 reviews, with an average rating of 8.610. The site's critical consensus reads, "Powerfully acted and directed, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always reaffirms writer-director Eliza Hittman as a filmmaker of uncommon sensitivity and grace." On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 92 out of 100 based on 38 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Critics praised the film for its approach to visual storytelling and naturalistic acting, particularly its avoidance of polemic to focus on the lives of and the bond between its two lead characters. Justin Chang of the Los Angeles Times wrote, "What makes Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always so forceful, and certainly the most searingly confrontational American drama about abortion rights in recent memory, is its quality of understatement, its determination to build its argument not didactically but cinematically." Richard Lawson of Vanity Fair wrote, "It's rare that the topic of abortion gets such an empathetic and holistic film treatment, passionate but unsentimental, principled without any predetermined moral." Chang concluded, "If the picture Hittman paints is stirringly bleak, it is not without its passages of tentative hope, even grace." Karen Hahn of Polygon wrote, "The slow build-up and Autumn and Skylar's stoicism through it all makes it all the more affecting when the reasoning behind the film's title is revealed." Naomi Fry of The New Yorker wrote, "In its profound sensitivity to everyday detail, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always makes the viewer aware of the mundane challenges that dog every step its heroines manage to take along that path, from the large, cheap suitcase bumped along with difficulty on subway steps, to the dwindling down to nothing funds in a secreted-away pouch, to the flutter-lidded late-night dozes taken on the subway in lieu of a place to stay, waiting out the hours." Critic Mark Kermode gave the film a 5-star rating and wrote, "Perfectly pitched and sensitively played, this is truthful, powerful, and profoundly moving fare from a filmmaker at the very top of her game," and added the film is perhaps best described as a perfectly observed portrait of female friendship. A coming-of-age story with road movie inflections, piercingly honest and deeply affecting. Kermode also lauded cinematographer Hélène Louvar, who here manages to capture moments of intense intimacy in unobtrusive fashion. Through her camera, we become both observers and participants, watching these young women's lives, but also empathetically experiencing their shared journeys. In 2023, it ranked 42nd on the Hollywood Reporter's list of the 50 best movies of the 21st century so far. The reporter wrote that while the COVID-19 pandemic affected the film's theatrical release, its artistic impact on independent cinema prevailed, its relevance and resonance still enduring even after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. It also ranked 15th on Collider's list of the 20 best drama movies of the 2020s so far. Collider called it one of the most excruciating viewings of the decade. In 2024, Looper ranked it number 15 on its list of the 50 best PG-13 movies of all time, writing, "The thoughtful camera work lends insight to the quiet, complicated world of the film's lead character with the emotionally immersive nature of the piece, managing to make something as simple as hands touching into something that tugs at your soul." From Eliza Hittman, the remarkable writer-director of It Felt Like Love and Beach Rats, comes another drama that manages to blend the gritty authenticity of a documentary with the poetic sensibility of pure cinema. In her impressively measured and beautifully understated third feature, Hittman tells an oft-hidden story of reproductive rights, an age-old issue that has urgent contemporary relevance. Yet, never, rarely, sometimes, always, never feels polemical. On the contrary, it is perhaps best described as a perfectly observed portrait of female friendship, a coming-of-age story with road movie inflections, piercingly honest and deeply affecting. Feature first-timer and accomplished musician Sidney Flanigan is superb as Autumn, a 17-year-old from Pennsylvania who discovers that she cannot get an abortion in her hometown without parental consent. Quietly desperate, Autumn reluctantly confides in her more outgoing cousin Skylar, rising star Talia Ryder, soon to be seen in Spielberg's West Side Story, who agrees to accompany her across state lines to New York. The pair imagine that the trip will be brief, but find themselves spending days and nights on the streets waiting for the procedure that Autumn was denied in Pennsylvania. Inspired by these untold journeys that women take, Anne Rossiter's Ireland's Hidden Diaspora, The Abortion Trail, and The Making of a London Irish Underground, 1980 to 2000, apparently proved an instructive work. Hittman's drama may be fictional, but it is firmly rooted in factual research. Like Kitty Green's current release The Assistant, everything about Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always has a matter-of-fact veracity. From heartbreaking early scenes in which we see Autumn helplessly punching her own bruised stomach, to her very different experiences at a pregnancy center in Pennsylvania and a Planned Parenthood clinic in Brooklyn. Indeed, in the pivotal scene from which the film takes its title, it is not an actor but a real counselor, Kelly Chapman, who asks Autumn about her history, her health, her safety, using a series of set questions to which those multiple-choice answers apply. Autumn's responses, which include significant silences, speak volumes not only about her own experiences but about those of so many women who find themselves in a similar situation. Brief scenes of anti-abortion activists picketing clinics remind us of the crisis facing women's rights in Trump's increasingly retrogressive America. Yet, as with her previous features, Hittman's primary focus is her characters, their lives, their experiences, their dreams and disappointments. Early scenes of Autumn and Skylar in their hometown, where both work part-time in the local grocery store, are an object lesson in how to convey vast amounts of information with minimal dialogue. Snapshots of an environment that has shaped the lives of these two very different characters. Significant, too, that the only time Autumn really seems to verbalize her feelings is when she plays a solo version of He's Got the Power at the school talent contest, turning the Exciters' upbeat 60s hit into a plaintive ballad, He Makes Me Do Things I Don't Want to Do, provoking cries of derision from the audience, followed by an awful moment of emptiness, and then a steely continuation through barely restrained tears. Hittman has described Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always as a narrative about a girl carrying around a lot of pain and burden and the loneliness of it all. That loneliness is certainly a key part of the film's emotional palette, captured with great insight and understanding. Yet ultimately, it is the growing bond between Autumn and Skylar that sticks in the mind, beautifully expressed in a strange moment of silent hand-holding that quite took my breath away. Plaudits to French cinematographer Hélène Louvard, who did such sensual work on Beach Rats, and who here manages to capture moments of intense intimacy in unobtrusive fashion. In a film in which so much is expressed through minute gestures, Louvard keeps a remarkable balance between the geography of these characters' faces and that of the ever-changing landscape through which they pass. Through her camera, we become both observers and participants, watching these young women's lives, but also empathetically experiencing their shared journeys. The result is a film that combines the melancholy magic of John Schlesinger's Midnight Cowboy with the humanist artfulness of the Dardenne brothers' finest neo-realist works. Perfectly pitched and sensitively played, this is truthful, powerful, and profoundly moving fare from a filmmaker at the very top of her game. A quiet teenager named Autumn, newcomer Sidney Flanigan, looks like she carries the weight of the world on her shoulders. She's introduced singing her heart out at a talent show after her classmates have all either lip-synced or done dance routines. There's something melancholy in Autumn that's not in most of her peers, and her only friend seems to be her cousin and co-worker Skylar, Talia Ryder. It's not long before we learn what's weighing on Autumn's mind. She's 17 and pregnant. Eliza Hittman, the writer-director of Beach Rats, returns to Sundance with her best work yet, a powerful drama that's mostly a character study of two fully realized young women, but also a commentary on how dangerous it is to be a teenage girl in America. With stunning performances from two completely genuine young leads, this is a movie people will talk about all year. Just the simple plot description of never, rarely, sometimes, always makes it sound pretty manipulative. A pair of teenage girls struggle in New York City after one of them becomes pregnant and they have to travel there for an abortion. I'll admit that I have a very low tolerance for stories of young people or children in jeopardy because it so often feels like a cheap trick to pull at the viewer's heartstrings. Hittman doesn't make that kind of movie. Her filmmaking values detail over melodrama, unsparing of the plight of the teenage girl in America, a place that often treats them as objects or preys on them. Whether it's the bro who makes lewd gestures at a restaurant, the grocery store manager who kisses his female employees' hands, or the drunk pervert who pulls out his dick on a subway train, teenage girls navigate a minefield of toxic masculinity on a daily basis. After Autumn learns that Pennsylvania, her home state, requires parental consent, she convinces Skylar to travel with her to New York to get the procedure. With very little money, they make the journey via bus and are pushed through a system that Autumn wasn't expecting. What really elevates Hittman's work here is the sense that Autumn and Skylar are making believable, character-driven decisions on the fly. Whether it's Autumn piercing her nose after finding out she's pregnant, maybe to take a form of control again, or how the women scramble to get what they need in New York, decisions feel organic and in the moment, adding to an incredible realism that's embedded throughout the film. It also helps that Hittman is daringly unafraid of silence. There are no monologues. Autumn barely talks at all for long stretches. But Hittman also pushes her camera in close on Flanigan and Ryder, looking for the truth in their faces instead of manipulative dialogue. Hittman also dodges the scary city story that her film could have become. For the most part, the people Autumn and Skylar meet in New York are helpful, especially those in the healthcare system. One in particular asks Autumn a series of questions, the scene which gives the film its fantastic title, and it's a breathtaking sequence, one in which it feels like Autumn herself is forced to come to terms with things she's buried, even if just for a few minutes. Flanigan is remarkable in this scene and throughout the film, and she's well matched by Ryder. Lesser writers would have made these two characters too similar, but Hittman trusts Ryder and Flanigan to carve out their own roles. They give two of the best young performances in a very long time. There are a few minor beats in Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always that feel either too long or too rushed. It's mostly a pacing issue in the center of the film, but this is a minor complaint for a major personal work. Hittman's visual acuity doesn't draw attention to itself, but don't underestimate that aspect either, reflected in simple beats like how she captures a Pennsylvania sunrise on a life-changing day or a tired head against a bus window. There's an artistry to the filmmaking here that elevates what really matters, her character work. It's so hard to make stories of young people that don't feel like they're using the precariousness of youth as a cheap trick. Adults often write dialogue for teenagers that sounds like posturing, what old people think young people sound like, or they embed moral messages in barely remembered memories of their younger days. The reason that Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is such an impressive piece of work is that Hittman has such deep compassion for her two leads, a pair of young women pushing through a world that is constantly putting obstacles in their path. You won't forget them. The 4 words in this title are the 4 possible replies to bureaucratic tick box questions about the frequency of your various sexual experiences. A young woman here must answer them before she is allowed to have an abortion. However rigid and blandly routine it seems, the 4-part answer grid is cleverly designed to get information about vulnerability. It is so easy instinctively and evasively to deny a difficult question structured as a yes-no, but much harder to check the never box when rarely, sometimes, and always are coolly offered as equivalently non-judgmental options. The lead character in Eliza Hittman's tough, realist drama is confronted with this central four-part inquisition about her life in one brilliantly controlled, enigmatic scene. Theoretically, it is just a bit of form-filling that doesn't appear to promise any real revelation to the audience, yet it does just that, delivering a penny-drop moment of realization, or perhaps it's more of an ambiguous hint and all the more disquieting for that. The story is about a 17-year-old called Autumn, played by newcomer Sidney Flanigan, who is pregnant and lives in a town in rural Pennsylvania where there is no question of being allowed a termination and no question of confiding in her family. After a tense encounter with an anti-abortion counselor at her local clinic, Autumn gets help from her worldly-wise cousin, Skylar, Talia Ryder, who works alongside her at a supermarket checkout. Skylar scrapes the cash together so that she and Autumn can covertly get the bus together to New York, where Autumn can get an abortion without anyone at home knowing. Their journey accumulates gradually in almost wordless tension and fear. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is in some ways part of a tradition going back to Midnight Cowboy, the uncaring big city bus station as the arena of poverty, vagrancy, and the market forces of sexual exploitation. When Autumn and Skylar arrive in New York, absence of money is like an aura that pulses off them. You can feel the grit and chill of everything they touch as, without much of a clue, they ask for directions and look like easy targets for predators. Hittman shrewdly emphasizes the clumsy misery of Autumn having to pull her wheelie suitcase around the sidewalks, clunking up and down subway steps, all the discomfort of tourism and none of the pleasure. In fact, Autumn and Skylar have already been befriended on the bus by Jasper, Théodore Pellerin, a boy who seems friendly enough, though it is Skylar who reveals herself as the most wised up of the three of them. This narrative doesn't accentuate abortion as an issue in ways you might expect, and abortionists and abortion are not freighted with obvious meaning in the way they are in, say, Christian Mungiu's 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, or Mike Leigh's Vera Drake, movies set in very different eras, but perhaps not so different as all that, given the anti-abortion rhetoric so current in the U.S. today. At first glance, the film it resembled for me is Juno, the film from screenwriter Diablo Cody about a teenage girl played by Ellen Page who gets pregnant with her very first sexual experience. That was a funny, articulate picture, but this is very different, and not merely because Juno does not, as it happens, want an abortion. Autumn has no intention of opening up to Skylar or to us about how she feels about being pregnant, or about a future in which she will no longer be pregnant, but in which all her existing problems will remain, having doubtless got worse. She remains almost impassive throughout, although there is a gripping opening scene at a school concert where she reveals her feelings in code by singing a version of the Exciters' 60s hit, He's Got the Power. Autumn is jeeringly heckled by a guy in the audience who knows the truth, or heard some gossip, and in an atmosphere of excruciating embarrassment, Autumn has to finish the song as best she can. It is Skylar who saves Autumn, and their relationship is at the heart of the film. It develops enigmatically and in near silence. By the end, you can feel Skylar wanting Autumn to say something. Anything, such as thank you, maybe. Hittman leaves Autumn's personal life opaque, and she discloses her own feelings in more singing. Her desolate karaoke version of a Jerry and the Pacemakers song. The night's the time for all your tears. Your heart may be broken tonight, but tomorrow in the morning light, don't let the sun catch you crying. Music is where the film's emotional meaning is unveiled. The basic plot of Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is easy enough to describe. A 17-year-old girl named Autumn, Sidney Flanigan, winds up pregnant in a small Pennsylvania town. Prevented from seeking an abortion by the state's parental consent laws, she takes off for New York City with her cousin Skylar, Talia Ryder, where what they'd assumed would be a one-day procedure proves considerably more complicated. But that synopsis, and the polemical issue movie treatment it might suggest, hardly does justice to the surgically precise emotional calibration of writer-director Eliza Hittman's exceptional film, which is both of a piece with and a significant step forward from her prior youth and crisis works, Beach Rats and It Felt Like Love. At once dreamlike and ruthlessly naturalistic, steadily composed yet shot through with roiling currents of anxiety, Never Rarely Sometimes Always is a quietly devastating gem. When we first meet Autumn, introverted, morose, standoffish, she's singing a confessional folk take on He's Got the Power at her high school talent show, only for a boy in the audience to interrupt her with a shout of slut. A tense exchange in a pizza place with her ineffectually supportive mother, Sharon Van Etten, and openly hostile stepfather, Ryan Eggold, follows, and the fact that her heckler is casually sitting a few tables over tells us everything we need to know about the claustrophobia of her hometown. When she gets back to her bedroom, she takes a look at herself in the mirror, and her eyes naturally turn to the growing bump in her lower abdomen. Autumn finds little help at the women's clinic downtown, where the nurses are outwardly warm and reassuring, though a close read of their word choices makes it fairly clear where they come down on the Roe v. Wade debate. Since an abortion in the state requires a parent's permission anyway, Autumn makes some hesitant, though plenty harrowing, attempts to end the pregnancy herself. Fortunately, her cousin Skylar, with whom she works at a rundown grocery store, quickly figures out Autumn's secret. Slipping some $10 from the register into her pocket, she wordlessly agrees to accompany her to New York for an abortion, and they hop on a Greyhound the next morning. Once they arrive, they find themselves shuttled back and forth through the labyrinthine corridors and roadblocks of the American healthcare system, which forces them to remain in the city much longer than they'd bargained for. Not having anywhere to stay, they spend the rest of their trip slogging sleeplessly from one station to another, lugging their shared suitcase up staircase after staircase. And though both girls are in way over their heads, Hittman never portrays the city as a menacing urban wasteland. Like so much of the adult world, it's simply indifferent to them. Which is not to say that the film is without threats. Throughout, Hittman makes us feel the weight of pervasive male attention. Whether it's a creeper on the subway, a flirtatious older supermarket customer, or even an ostensibly harmless college kid, Théodore Pellerin, who tries to talk up Skylar on the bus, the fear of men barging their way uninvited into these girls' lives hangs heavy over everything. Hittman's screenplay is a marvel of economy, never wasting time filling in relationship details or backstories when they can be more powerfully hinted at. Most obviously, we never learn the father of Autumn's unborn child, though the film subtly offers two possible candidates. Neither are good, and one is particularly bad. The scene that provides the film's title is a gut-churning back and forth at a clinic that opens several doors into even darker chapters in Autumn's past, all of which are left purposefully and hauntingly unexplored. We may not quite get under Autumn's skin, but that's by design. It isn't just that she holds everyone at arm's length, but that she's a girl for whom survival is contingent upon compartmentalizing trauma. And Flanigan, a first-time actor, has a disarming way of parceling out tiny fragments of Autumn's inner life, only to quickly raise her defenses again as soon as she realizes that she's doing it. Skylar is considerably more outgoing, though she knows her cousin too well to try and draw her out. Indeed, the most eerily magical moments in the film are the ones that show Autumn and Skylar's almost telepathic communication. With just a shared glance, a squeeze of the hand, or a minute spent applying one another's makeup in a bathroom, Flanigan and Ryder are able to speechlessly convey things to which other films might devote pages of dialogue. Not just reactive emotions, but complex decisions, explanations, assurances. Both performances are outstanding. But what's most remarkable about Never Rarely Sometimes Always is the way it manages to honor the gravity of Autumn's experience without ever sensationalizing it, or allowing the film to veer toward melodrama. It's clear that taking this trip is one of the biggest, scariest things she's ever done, but once the film fades to black, it's easy to imagine Autumn living her life more or less as she had before. It's easy to imagine her never mentioning the experience again, consigning it to yet another of the emotional lockboxes she keeps deep inside. This may as well be the sort of thing that happens to teenage girls all the time. Because, of course, it is. To call Eliza Hittman's Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always an abortion movie is to do it a disservice. Not that such a description would be inaccurate. The film presents one of the most detailed, non-judgmental autopsies of the controversial medical procedure I have seen in a feature film. However, one could make a case that even more important than the abortion is the bonding that occurs between the introverted, sullen main character, Autumn, Sidney Flanigan, and her sunnier, more practical cousin, Skylar, Talia Ryder. The beating heart of Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always isn't Autumn's struggle with terminating her pregnancy. It's the way the two girls discover companionship and the strength it offers. The early scenes of Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always offer some of the staples of teen high school movies before the narrative deviates into singular territory. There's a high school talent show, an after-pageant dinner during which an unsettled family dynamic is revealed, and a recognition that Autumn is a rebel without a cause. She soon finds one, however, when a visit to a clinic confirms a pregnancy fear. Autumn doesn't wrestle with the decision to have an abortion. She knows she's not ready to be a mother and fears the stigma in her rural Pennsylvania town associated with carrying a child to term, even if it's for adoption. She doesn't tell anyone, although her observant cousin, Skylar, figures it out. The two hatch a plot to travel to New York. Pennsylvania law requires parental consent for an abortion to get the deed done. The trip and its consequences are more daunting than either one imagines when they first board the bus. Hittman's attention to detail is one of the reasons why the movie works as effectively as it does. Her dialogue is sparse. She relies on close-ups and the actors' expressions to convey emotion. The characters and places in the film feel lived in. The local clinic where Autumn learns of her pregnancy is both underfunded and operated by women with limited training. Instead of performing a blood test, they give the girl what's commonly referred to as a pee stick. Autumn asks if it's the kind she could buy in a grocery store, and they confirm that it is. When she indicates that termination is a consideration, she is shown an anti-abortion documentary. The New York scenes convey the immenseness of the big city to the small-town girls. Everything about it is bigger, brighter, and more frightening. They meet a young man, Jasper, Théodore Pellerin, who does little to hide his interest in Skylar. The young woman uses that interest to obtain money for return bus fare. Jasper perhaps doesn't get everything he wants, but a secretive makeout session is enough for him to capitulate. Hittman presents this in a straightforward fashion, never condemning Skylar for what she's offering or Jasper for his eagerness. Perhaps the most distinctive differences between Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always and other films that advocate the importance of choice are its tone and the way in which the narrative develops. The movie not only eschews a preachy approach, but avoids the kind of melodramatic elements that viewers have come to expect from issue films. That's not to say Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always lacks a strong emotional component. The scene in which Autumn is given a questionnaire, the multiple choice answers to which form the title, is wrenching. Without saying much, the character reveals a lot. Although we never learn the identity of the father, it's not germane to the story, some disturbing things are revealed when Autumn avoids the absolutes. For her leads, Hittman has cast newcomers and both give strong, credible performances. Sidney Flanigan, in particular, should be able to use this role as a springboard to future appearances. Put her alongside Jennifer Lawrence, Winter's Bone, Thomasin McKenzie, Leave No Trace, and Elsie Fisher, 8th Grade, as fresh-faced actresses who have made the most out of a first starring role. Her chemistry with Talia Ryder offers a warmth that stands in contrast to the film's more difficult elements and Autumn's glum nature. Although it would be disingenuous to claim Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always doesn't have a political position, the film is made with such care and focus on the particulars of the situation, rather than melodramatic tropes, that one doesn't have to agree with Hittman's perspective to be moved by the film. After taking home prizes at both the 2020 Berlin International Film Festival and the 2020 Sundance Film Festival, never, rarely, sometimes always had its theatrical run derailed by the coronavirus pandemic. Focus Features has elected to make it available as a first-run video-on-demand selection, and for those with a taste for serious, non-prefabricated dramas, this is worth seeking out. In her hypnotic 2017 feature Beach Rats, Eliza Hittman trained a tough yet lyrical gaze on the conflicted self-discovery of a teenager in summertime blue-collar Brooklyn, exploring his sexuality while dodging the toxic masculinity of his tribal buddies. Trading that sun-blasted environment for a much darker intimacy, the writer-director returns to the adolescent female focus of her insightful first feature, It Felt Like Love, though that film's hunger for sexual experience has made way here for an uneasy reckoning with its collateral damage as a young woman struggles to take control of her body after finding herself pregnant. Slated for a March release through Focus Features, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always should continue to widen the admiration for Hittman's signature blend of unadorned realism with moody, melancholy dreaminess, while providing an impressive showcase for talented young screen discoveries Sidney Flanigan and Talia Ryder. At a time when reproductive rights are under threat in many states, the film also stands to earn attention for its candid and clear-eyed contemplation of abortion as a choice arrived at not with hand-wringing, but with sobering pragmatism. Swiftly establishing that Autumn, Flanigan, is something of an outsider in her rural Pennsylvania community, Hittman opens with what appears to be a high school talent show. Unlike the jolly 1950s-style dance group or the cheesy Elvis impersonator that precede her on stage, there's nothing frivolous about Autumn's act as she accompanies herself on acoustic guitar, singing a decelerated, emo-fied take on the Exciters' hit, He's Got the Power, her sad eyes heavy with silver glitter. She falters only briefly as a male student in the audience yells "slut" during her song, but the same jerks crude mockery of her from across the diner where she goes with her family after the show gets under her skin. And although Autumn's caring mother, Sharon Van Etten, and her cousin Skylar offer support, her stepfather, Ryan Eggold, refuses to say anything encouraging about her performance, making it clear he's had enough of her sullen withdrawal. Right from the start, Hittman plants the idea of girls drawn into compromising situations and judged harshly for it, while boys get bragging rights among their snickering peers. The lyrics of the song Autumn performs. He makes me do things I don't want to do. He makes me say things I don't want to say. And even though I want to break away, I can't stop saying I adore him, can't stop doing things for him, are echoed later in her responses to the questions of an abortion clinic counselor, with the multiple choice answers providing the movie's title. Hittman's script pares away all unnecessary detail, so we first learn of Autumn's pregnancy in a simple shot of her slight belly bulge before she confirms it at a local women's clinic where she's shown a graphic anti-abortion video. The awful solitude of her predicament runs through the film like a sorrowful undertow, countered by the warmth of her closeness with Skylar, who's more like a sister than a cousin, even if they tend to talk around anything too sensitive. At no point does Autumn confide in her mother. It's Skylar who takes the initiative at the supermarket where they work as cashiers for a pervy boss when she lifts a wad of cash to cover their bus fare to New York. That shift in location, from the shabby storefronts, dying industrial sites, and wintry farmlands of Pennsylvania to the crowds and confusion of Manhattan's Port Authority bus terminal, changes up the grainy textures of cinematographer Hélène Louva's limber 16mm camera work. It also magnifies the vulnerability of the two young women who arrive in New York with nothing but the address of a Brooklyn reproductive clinic. When her pregnancy turns out to be further along than Autumn was told, the termination procedure becomes more complicated, requiring them to stay 2 nights with no money for hotels or meals. As she revealed in her earlier films, Hittman is an exemplary director of young actors, coaxing unimpeachably natural work here from her leads, in which their courage, fears, resilience, and gnawing uncertainties play out across their faces as they kill time riding subways, in video arcades, or simply wandering around the bus terminal. Flanigan is a real find, Her background as a musician deftly incorporated into a stunningly nuanced screen debut in the opening and then again in a later karaoke bar scene in which she puts a haunted spin on Jerry and the Pacemakers' Don't Let the Sun Catch You Crying. Ryder is equally compelling, and their lovely chemistry gives the movie a gentle, emotional pull. The moments of understated tenderness between them seldom involve much direct discussion of their situation, but there are notes of lingering poignancy, such as a fight that causes Skylar to stomp off, later reconciling with Autumn, in a beautiful scene in which their innate understanding of one another outweighs any need for an apology. Hittman's storytelling is seductively loose, impressionistic, but key episodes give shape to the girls' unsettling odyssey. One involves them reconnecting with a fellow passenger from the bus, Théodore Pellerin, who made no secret of his attraction to Skylar, trying to impress her with his knowledge of the cool New York music scene. His tuneless karaoke rendition of Flock of Seagulls' Wishing almost makes his desire endearing. Hittman refuses to judge either Skylar for using her sexuality to get some cash out of him, or the horny stranger for taking advantage of the tight spot that the girls consistently play down. Flanigan's face speaks volumes as she watches her cousin making out with him. The film's most intense scene is Autumn's interview with the clinic counselor. Louvart's camera locks in on Flanigan as Autumn tries to answer the questions of the caring medical professional, the patient's eyes revealing shame, regret, and humiliation. Abortion is a contentious issue, and I imagine an indie film about it that doesn't have movie stars won't draw in anyone who hasn't already made up their minds about being pro-choice or anti-abortion. And yet, watching Eliza Hittman's moving drama, my concerns about the film's efficacy of its advocacy slipped away as I was drawn further into the crushing normalcy of a casually cruel system that makes women endure an endless barrage of indignities. Watching the two young women at the center of Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is devastating it just because of the incredible performances and confident direction, but because we know that the experience depicted is heartbreakingly common among women seeking an abortion. Autumn, Sidney Flanigan, is a 17-year-old living in rural Pennsylvania who learns she has an unplanned pregnancy. Unable to tell her parents about it, and with the local clinic pressuring her to give birth, Autumn confides in her cousin and friend Skylar, Talia Ryder. Together, they decide to go to New York City, where Autumn will be able to get an abortion. However, as they make the trek by bus and subway and from clinic to clinic, the two teenagers are frequently confronted by their lack of money, a support system, and an onslaught of terrible men looking to prey upon them at every turn. What should be a simple procedure for a young woman who wants control of her body and her life instead becomes a harrowing odyssey fraught with roadblocks. Because abortion is a hot-button issue, I'm a privileged white guy, so I get to refer to abortion as an issue removed from myself because no one will ever pass a law telling me what I can and can't do with my reproductive organs. Some folks won't be able to see anything more in this story. It will be an issue film, and because it's an indie, one that's unlikely to change opinions. If you're anti-abortion, you'll feel repulsed by Autumn's choices and think she's a baby killer. If you're pro-choice, you'll be reminded to donate to Planned Parenthood. Viewing the film through the lens of advocacy narrows Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, because then it's only judged by what it does or does not accomplish on a societal level, which is an impossible burden for any single movie. Instead, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is best viewed not as a movie about changing hearts and minds, as much as making it as experiential as possible. To use a recent example, the movie 1917 has a clear point of view on the nature of war, but it chooses to tell its story by attaching you to two people who could stand in for countless others. That's a difficult needle to thread because you don't want your lead characters to be ciphers, but you also want their story to be broad enough to encompass similar tales. Hittman manages that balance perfectly, as we can't help but empathize with the plight of Autumn and Skylar. Everything about these two teenagers feels lived in and authentic in terms of their chemistry and their struggle without simply making them stand in for every economically disadvantaged teenager looking to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. Both actresses are a revelation here, and they demand our compassion not through big dramatic speeches, but through little moments. When Autumn is answering a questionnaire at Planned Parenthood, Hittman keeps the camera locked in on Flanigan's face, and we're told an entire story without ever having to hear the exact narrative. That's not to keep Autumn's tale vague, but because Hittman trusts us to understand what has happened while staying true to her protagonist's stoic nature. Autumn isn't much of a talker, but we need to understand where exactly she's coming from, and the questionnaire scene broke me. The whole film is hard, but the questionnaire scene absolutely broke me. Hittman doesn't need to get flashy or swing for a big moment, because what hooks you about Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is the normalcy of it all. There's nothing spectacular about the lack of abortion providers or the hidden costs of trying to obtain an abortion, or the clinics that deceive young women to suit an anti-abortion agenda rather than the needs of the patient. All of this is treated as normal in America, and it leads to a teenager like Autumn punching herself in the stomach in her bedroom, hoping to induce a miscarriage. I don't know who that system works for, but it certainly doesn't work for the person who's actually pregnant. It would be nice to say, reasonable people can disagree about abortion, but Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always shows why that's not true. There's a real cost to how this system is set up, and Hittman perfectly walks us through what that cost entails. If you think the only thing it costs is disagreement, then you're probably not worried about a situation like Autumn's. You're free to dismiss this movie as pro-choice propaganda, but the pro-choice crowd isn't out here setting up fake abortion clinics to dupe pregnant women. You can call Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always just another aberration movie, but the likely Best Picture winner isn't treated as just another war movie. I guess that says something about which battles the world considers worthy of attention. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is about two women fighting through a cruel hell of our own devising. Don't tell me it doesn't matter. Eliza Hittman's Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always avoids the type of political rhetoric and overt dramaturgy that could have made it disingenuous, thus ineffectual, or more of a statement than a feeling experience. Although it centers on an inward 17-year-old, Autumn, Sidney Flanigan, who travels from Pennsylvania to New York to receive an abortion, the film balances its social consciousness with a tender and human story. Without judgment, only detailed observation, Hittman immerses the viewer in Autumn's experience as she seeks to terminate her unintended pregnancy. However, it could hardly be called a film whose subject is abortion or reproductive rights. So much of its runtime involves seeing the world from Autumn's point of view. She visits a women's clinic, rides on buses and subways, and wanders New York alongside her more world-weary cousin, Skylar, Talia Ryder. The film immerses us in these distinct perspectives, and the commentary comes naturally. Hittman's fidelity to that ambition rarely wavers, resulting in a film that feels authentic, even vital for our time. In a sense, Hittman has made a coming-of-age film about a teenager who resolves to take charge of her own body and future. After Autumn returns home from a crisis pregnancy center, where she discovers that she's several weeks along, she has already made up her mind to have an abortion. The next thing she does is pierce her nose in an act of self-possession. Since she comes from a small, drab town in a state that demands parental consent, she and Skylar spring for a New York trip. Hittman shows Autumn and Skylar's interactions with several men, from their grocery store boss, whose unwanted advances come through a narrow passage, to a public masturbator. Men keep asserting themselves into Autumn and Skylar's lives, including a fellow bus passenger, Jasper, Théodore Pellerin, who touches Skylar's arm to make chit-chat before insisting on getting her number for a meetup in New York. It's a long trip, and the cousins barely speak to one another about these encounters or what will happen when they arrive. But their brief exchange about Jasper's repeated texts reveals that they must navigate a barrage of intrusive come-ons as part of everyday life. For the first half of the film, Hittman adopts an effective, albeit affected, docudrama style that conforms to modern formal notions of realism, a stripped-down aesthetic that makes the viewer feel present and in the moment with Autumn. Julia Holter's score amounts to recessive mood tones. Earlier scenes have a muted, grayed-out color palette. The skies look perpetually overcast with visible grain activating everything in the frame. Cinematographer Helene Louvar shoots on 16mm stock in mostly handheld camera work that feels like guerrilla filmmaking at times, especially on New York streets, where the occasional passerby glances at the camera. The city scenes feel more alive. Based on color alone, Hittman seems to argue for the city over small-town life with its enlivened visuals. Through it all, the frame almost always occupies Autumn's perspective, aside from the odd moment or two from Jasper's view as he ogles Skylar, a curious inclusion to be sure. The film's restrained style mirrors Autumn's quiet, introverted presence, enhanced through the stark contrast of the devastating scene when the story's emotions reach their height. Autumn meets with her Planned Parenthood counselor and answers questions about her pregnancy and sexual history. She must provide one of the multiple-choice responses supplied by the title, and her responses, or lack thereof, are both telling and utterly crushing. This sequence takes us back to the opening scenes at a high school talent show, where clean-cut teens perform in a series of back-to-the-60s-inspired songs that typify their carefree worldview. Then Autumn appears in glittery eye makeup, performing a decidedly modern cover of the Exciters' pop tune, He's Got the Power, from 1963. The painful truth of the lyrics, he makes me do things I don't want to do, he makes me say things I don't want to say, he's got the power of love over me, won't become clear until Autumn's interview with her counselor. We also think back to her treatment by her mother's husband, Ryan Eggold, whose use of the word slut with the family dog seems pointed, and we wonder if he might be Autumn's abusive partner. But those familiar with Hittman's debut, It Felt Like Love, 2013, or second film Beach Rats, 2017, will know she prefers to keep narrative exposition to a minimum, leaving associations such as this to the viewer. Of course, there's certainly potential for Hittman to stand on a soapbox and turn her film into a polemic. For the moment, abortion remains legal in the United States. However, the current presidential administration exploits every opportunity, including the COVID-19 pandemic, to limit safe and affordable means for women to access legal abortions. There's an active push to eliminate the rights women have over their bodies, and Hittman's film shows the consequences of this. Watch Autumn's interactions with the initial crisis pregnancy center, whose idea of a pregnancy test is an over-the-counter urine solution, not a blood test. Once they confirm the results, a counselor who mentions that she's also a mother asks, "Are you abortion-minded?" When Autumn confirms that she is, she's shown a harsh anti-abortion video. Hittman reveals that, unlike Planned Parenthood, pregnancy resource centers often receive funding from Christian groups and other anti-abortion organizations that have an agenda outside of helping women receive proper care. Their dubious professionalism is apparent when they send Autumn home with a pathetic gift bag full of informational brochures. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always marks the incredible debut of Flanigan, a young musician in her first on-screen acting role. It's a debut that recalls Elsie Fisher in 8th grade or Thomasin McKenzie in Leave No Trace, both from 2018, in that she's capable of creating an inner character out of the minimal dialogue. Ryder, too, is excellent. Hittman's film allows both performers to confront the dangers young women face and the fortitude they must have. It's a portrait whose remarks about predatory men and abortion in America linger on the margins, showing how crisis pregnancy centers have ulterior motives, how Planned Parenthoods must have metal detectors and bag checks for fear of extremists, how frequently women's bodies are subject to the whims of men, and how young women prevented from access to abortions will resort to great, even dangerous lengths to obtain one. It's even more impressive that Hittman does all this with a PG rating. Despite the heavy subject matter, she makes the film accessible and gives an immersive look at the perspective of young women today. A negative can sometimes be positive, while a positive is always positive. In the context of Eliza Hittman's, most known for 2017's breakout Sundance hit Beach Rats, another film daring enough to explore the contemporary and sometimes problematic sexual lives of teenagers. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. This is a pregnancy test for 17-year-old Autumn, a debut performance from Sidney Flanigan that is beyond remarkable at expressing authentic and raw emotion with vulnerability and emptiness. But if one wants to possibly overthink things, the journey of friendship that this unwanted pregnancy sends Autumn and her cousin Skylar, Talia Ryder, giving the film another outstanding breakthrough performance, and who will also be seen in Steven Spielberg's upcoming interpretation of West Side Story, on is akin to flipping a negative upside down into a positive. Naturally, there is much here regarding the roadblocks and complications when it comes to abortion, doubly so when the girl happens to be a minor, but it's also a display of an unshakable and unwavering bond between relatives that resemble the closest of friends more than anything, and a quietly powerful study at that. Eliza Hittman is an assured and confident filmmaker, aware of how to subtly give ample amounts of detail regarding the state of her characters. The film opens at a school talent show and sees Autumn heartbreakingly perform a song about what we can only assume is her terrible, possibly former significant other. From the beginning, it's clear that she hasn't had much luck in the boyfriend department, but things at home don't seem to be any better, with alcoholic parents oblivious as to how to handle or understand her feelings. They would rather just call her out as constantly behaving foul and succinctly exclaim she needs help. Nevertheless, Autumn has a reason for her lack of happiness and dejected appearance. She has found out she is somewhere between 10 and 18 weeks pregnant, does not see herself as prepared to be a mother, and will likely receive no support from her immediate family. Autumn decides that the best path for her is abortion, even after Planned Parenthood shows her an outdated video condemning the act. But living in Pennsylvania means she needs a guardian present to get the procedure done. This causes her to look into some self-inflicted abortion methods. Certain parts of this film can be rough to watch, but for bracingly real and authentic reasons, and eventually on a trip to New York with her cousin Skylar, she seems to catch on rather quickly what is happening. And one of the strongest understated elements of the film is how well these two can communicate and support one another without saying much at all, where things are less strict. Working at the same grocery store, they decide to use their paychecks to fund everything from travel to the procedure itself. Even before leaving Pennsylvania, the girls frequently encounter predatory men, sometimes much older, that are inviting them to parties, out for drinks, or generally something creepy. Coupling that with a broken home situation, these young cousins really do only have themselves to look out for one another and keep each other persistent in life and strong. There's a scene towards the end of the film, completely unrelated to the pregnancy, where Autumn and Skylar find themselves in an uncomfortable circumstance, all as the photography makes it a point to highlight their pinky fingers interlocking. I don't want to say there are always ups between these cousins, but the aforementioned scene is certainly damning evidence that together they can overcome anything together with undying support. Helene Louvart's cinematography is as graceful as Eliza Hittman's filmmaking, utilizing facial close-ups and extended takes to better emphasize the incredible acting prowess from Sidney Flanigan. She is absolutely going to be a star one day, and might wind up as the single greatest breakthrough performer of 2020. There is a sequence inside of a nurse's office involving a series of mountingly personal questions that are both invasive but genuinely concerning for her predicament. It's designed to break her down just as much as the audience witnessing her tears and struggles to give a simple answer to challenging inquiries. The reason Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is so profoundly moving doesn't just come down to excellent filmmaking technique and a pair of unknown actors putting in awards-worthy work, but Eliza Hittman's deeply empathetic approach to this sensitive subject material. As someone who's somewhat against the idea of abortion in certain situations, although I would obviously never dare tell a woman what she should do with her body, the character of Autumn is real and resonates. She's a likable person, and by all means mature for her age, apparently dealt terrible cards in life, and who unfortunately got mixed up with some equally terrible male sexual partner's romantic interests. I wanted the outcome that she felt was best for her, But even when I was wincing at the idea of self-inflicted abortion, the bond between relatives' best friends was a universal secondary plot thread that is just as emotionally draining. Eliza Hittman poignantly places us not just in the life of a pregnant teenager, but the hardships and casual sexual abuse women are far too often at the receiving end of, all while showing a tight personal connection between cousins that would do anything for each other. What's rare is seeing material this delicate and controversial treated with so much warmth, compassion, beauty, and understanding. They are uniformly professional, compassionate, and honest, and abortion is silent, painless, and streamlined. After a 10-minute procedure, Autumn sips some water and rests, and then she is done. She tells her curious cousin the abortionists were nice enough, and as they eat fries together, she smiles for the first time in the movie. They head for home, relieved, and the movie ends. The film insisted we consider Autumn as a real person, and so I found myself wondering what would happen when their bus reaches Pennsylvania. Will her stepfather beat her for running off? Probably. Will her employer prosecute her? For theft, certainly. Will she find a boyfriend who agrees to wear condoms? More than sometimes doubtful. What will she do? Just keep going to New York for abortions until she is old enough to sign the forms herself? Are we supposed to imagine that taciturn and self-reliant Autumn will keep her follow-up appointment and phone a stranger for help in discerning safe relationships for the future, having been trained by the film to insist on verity? I rejected this possibility. I loved the style of this movie. I loved the acting and the cinematography. I loved how Autumn is a wounded girl, not a murderer or a selfish wench or a May. But I hated the dishonesty that unflinchingly told the truth about every ordeal except the one it all hinges on. In the end, I felt like I had sat through a 1 hour and 40-minute long public service announcement, realistic enough to make us understand it is about real people just like us, pointed enough to drive home a single answer to our problem: call this number and get help. Watch this movie and see why we need better abortion access. Other information about this film: Autumn Sidney Flanigan is 16 years old and pregnant. Abortion law in her home state of Pennsylvania prohibits minors from undergoing the procedure without parental consent, and the employees at the local women's clinic are pro-life and unhelpful. With her cousin Skylar, Talia Ryder, Autumn takes a bus to New York in the hopes of self-autonomously accessing an abortion. So begins Never. Rarely, Sometimes, Always, which premiered at this year's Sundance Film Festival, a tender observational drama about teenage abortion from Eliza Hittman, who wrote and directed Beach Rats 2017, in which she brought her naturalistic, soulful touch to the tale of a teenage boy coming to grips with his identity. Dialogue is sparse throughout the film. Self-induced abortion. Autumn Googles in an early sequence. We cut to a large pile of vitamin C tablets on the kitchen counter that she consumes all in one go before she stands in front of her mirror, shirt lifted, and punches herself hard all over her stomach area. The next day at work, she throws up. Skylar finds her, tries to get Autumn off work early, and then the girls are booking bus tickets. They do not say much to each other. We do not know if there was a conversation about what happened or why they are about to take an interstate trip. Their bus trip is silent. They don't chat or listen to music or read, and the only interruption is the boy Jasper Théodore Pellerin, who comes to talk Skylar up. The intentionally scant dialogue makes implicit Autumn struggles, hinting at her emotions and thoughts, and Hittman yields this silence into revealing the stigma existing around Autumn's pregnancy and her intended abortion is something she can't or doesn't want to fully articulate. She is intensely isolated in her body, which is the growing source of her anxieties and fears as it becomes a lurking shadow over the rest of the film. When Autumn finally arrives in New York to discover that she is 18 weeks pregnant and not 10 weeks as the Pennsylvania clinic had determined, it's a painful moment, but she remains quiet, and the sounds of the everyday around her swell in volume, the subway clangs and screeches, The crowds are overwhelmingly noisy lines of dialogue, overlapping each other. Hittman depicts the clamor of the external environment to amplify Autumn's inner turmoil and highlights her unsaid suffering. Through Flanigan's angsty but restrained performance, it is evident that although Autumn's self-expression is stifled, her discomfort is etched into her experience of the world around her, having an unwanted pregnancy dispelling it. All in secret is a physical and mental burden she must carry. While centrally focused on the two teens, Hittman positions male figures on the edge of most scenes, a subtle yet pointed depiction of how they intrude on Autumn and Skylar's agency as young women. At every turn, the presence of men feels dangerous and threatening. There is the icky supermarket manager who smooches Skylar and Autumn's hands when they hand over the cash packet from the register. At the end of their shifts, the father figure at Autumn's house who stares at her on the couch, lazily drinking a beer, while a dog nuzzles his crotch. In New York, it is the late-night subway passengers who all happen to be men, one of whom starts to masturbate openly in his suit. While all of these male tropes are disturbingly familiar, and most are overtly, inappropriately sexual, Jasper is perhaps the most common dangerous type. He is young and fresh-faced, polite and seemingly nice. The boundaries he might be crossing are murky with his insistent texting and flirting with Skylar, paying for all their drinks, trying to get her alone after bowling and karaoke. As these figures hover on the periphery of the film's shots, so too do they hover in our mind's eye. Such as during a questionnaire Autumn must answer at the Women's Health Clinic about her sexual experiences. The answers to these questions are the titular. Never, rarely, sometimes, or always, they are personal, and inquire into possible acts of non-consensual or unsafe sex that Autumn may have been subject to. She is unable to answer, on the verge of breaking down. This is the most we glean of her inner turmoil. What is she thinking of? Who forced her to do what no answers are ever offered, but the list of male characters looms in one's mind whose presence becomes more darkly suggestive, yet the film offers safe, gentle spaces, which are female-centric. The women who inhabit the women's health clinics in New York are kind and professional. Most of all, Skylar's companionship is unwavering. She asks Autumn if she is okay. If she is tired, she carries their suitcase most of the time. She accompanies her wordlessly from appointment to appointment. Hittman's observational and true-to-life style with minimal dialogue styling or theatrics spotlights such spaces of unspoken sisterhood. At times, Skylar is a bit bored or frustrated, such as a notable scene when Autumn tells her to off after Skylar asks how they'll get the money for bus tickets home. There are a lot of other fuck-offs that apply in this film to creepy men or the disempowering state healthcare system, but this is different. This one finally pisses the ever-patient Skylar off, but their bond is so strong that of course she doesn't. Really off, and in fact continues to care for her in unasked-for ways by resorting to more desperate measures for bus money, true intimacy, and especially that forged between closest friends and family may look abrasive at times. Hittman portrays the warmth of this relationship, allowing the moments of both Autumn and Skylar's self-determination to shine without eradicating the darker truths of what landed them in the situation in the first place. There's even relief and joy in their interactions, giving us a glimpse into their youth. Moments of stupid banter being happily lost in the city, some understanding strangers and a loyal friend joined to the hip in comfortable silence. Regardless of the moral or religious arguments wielded by pro-life activists, there is one truth they cannot deny. Even if abortion is outlawed, pregnant women who don't want to give birth will try to find ways to rid themselves of their fetuses. Eliza. Hittman's film takes that truth as its guiding premise, and everything about it, from its clinical exploration of the abortion-seeking process to the way the story makes the sexual dynamic for adolescents specific, focuses the viewer's attention on the unwavering will behind the protagonist's quest. In fact, the choice of setting the opening scene at a high school talent show with a 1950s theme might feel like a bad joke in any other movie, but in this one, it immediately conveys the idea that matters haven't really changed for American teenagers in 50 years autumn. Sidney Flanigan stands alone on stage with a guitar singing the 1963 hit Got the Power. While one boy in the audience yells slut, she sulks off the stage to desultory applause. Things are not better at home. Autumn's stepfather Ryan Egold complains about her depressive attitude, which her mother Sharon Van Etten picks up on but cannot fathom. Autumn eventually summons the wherewithal to go to the Planned Parenthood clinic in her small working-class Pennsylvania town, where she discovers that she is in fact pregnant. Her decision to terminate the pregnancy is not discussed with anyone, nor does Hittman give any indication that Autumn mulls it over. It is a foregone conclusion, and after a disturbing instance of attempted self-harm, she starts looking for ways to get an abortion. In Pennsylvania, however, a minor must have the permission of a parent or guardian, and Autumn is loath to tell anyone of her predicament. The only person she can confide in is her cousin, Skylar Talia Ryder, with whom she works part-time at a supermarket where the manager makes sexually suggestive comments as a matter of course. Because of Autumn's singular determination, Skylar offers to go with her to New York, where it is assumed an abortion is easy to obtain. And after the pair raid the cash register, they hop a bus, though some will label. Never, rarely, sometimes, always, the title refers to the multiple-choice questionnaire that abortion patients must fill out regarding their sexual histories, a road movie. It also has that surreal quality of a memory of an overwhelming experience that happened so long ago. To say that neither Autumn nor Skylar is prepared for not only New York, but the tribulations involved in getting a difficult medical procedure with insufficient funds and knowledge is a vast understatement. Hittman's presentation of Autumn's doggedness in pursuit of her goal is so single-minded as to be scary in and of itself, despite the fact that the people they meet are for the most part good, even the college kid Théodore Pellerin, who hits on Skylar on the bus and whom they later hit up in need. Turn for help to survive their night in the city and get back home, is sincere in his sympathy, even if he demands some kind of sexual gratification in return. Never, rarely, sometimes, always has an extremely simple premise, but its complications in terms of social themes and emotional resonance are too numerous to catalog. By laying out that incontrovertible truth about the abortion question, the movie actually transcends it. More detail, I keep thinking about the suitcase Skylar Talia. Ryder packs sweaters and a pair of jeans into an oversized travel bag. Oversized. At least for what is supposed to be a day-long trip. The next morning, Skylar and her cousin, Autumn Sidney Flanigan, wake up when it's still dark outside to board a bus from their hometown in rural Pennsylvania to New York City. When they get to Manhattan, the cousins take turns carrying the large bag, guarding it, rolling it on the sidewalk, or lugging it up and down steep subway stairs. The bag is the burden that they carry. The pair has carefully planned a trip, swiping cash from the grocery store where they both work or riding the subway all night, to avoid paying for a hotel to New York so that Autumn can get an abortion without her mom, Sharon Van Etten, and stepdad Ryan Egold knowing, since Pennsylvania requires parental consent for the procedure. Never, rarely, sometimes, always, from director Eliza Hittman Beach Rats, it felt like Love Buffalo Jugalos is a poignant and preant drama that has become particularly timely as states including Texas and Iowa move to enact abortion bans amid the CO-19 pandemic. The camera favors emotive close-ups, creating intimacy as if the viewer gets a chance to see the world through Autumn's often solemn, stoic gaze, but also a certain kind of unknowability. Hittman's script has a reflective quietude about it, marked by only the spars of dialogue. The viewer is not exactly privy to Autumn's thoughts, but we get telling glimpses into her psyche, and gestures that have their own kind of gravitas. Take the talent show at the film's opening, for example, where she sings a melancholy take on He's Got the Power from the Exciters, while her classmates sing more poppy, nostalgic tracks from the 50s and 60s. As one boy heckles her from the audience, Autumn pauses, then continues singing. It's a reflection of her resolve, dissonance from her peers, and the myriad ways men harass women in the film. From a male grocery store manager's insistence on kissing Autumn and Skylar's hands when they clock out for the day to touchy subway riders, there is a naturalness to never, rarely, sometimes always, particularly Flanigan and Ryder's performances. They don't project the witty aplomb of heroines in many coming-of-age movies. They talk as teenagers might, with Autumn's cautious determination and Skylar's nervous, excited energy. Skylar is the more verbose of the duo, but their conversations are usually pared down to the essential how to get to New York, stay safe in the city, and actually secure an abortion despite the many hurdles. For one, when Autumn arrives at a New York Planned Parenthood, she learns that when she first got her ultrasound in Pennsylvania, the clinic lied about how far along she was so as to try to prevent her from being able to carry out the procedure. As a result, she must book with a different Planned Parenthood. The following day, Autumn and Skylar are forced to stay longer than they intended without enough money or a place to sleep. Hittman's work is remarkably precise. She does not focus on anything extraneous to the central drama of Autumn's journey. When the moment comes that Autumn is asked to reflect on her life outside of her immediate journey to obtain an abortion, there's a scene of catharsis that resonates deeply, due in part to Hittman's clarity and eye for detail. Never, rarely, sometimes always chronicles Autumn's tortuous and convoluted path just to take agency over her body, studying the patience and perseverance that women often need to navigate the world. It's a film punctuated by waiting for one appointment or the other, or for the promise of safety. There are, however, brief moments that remind audiences that Autumn and Skylar are just kids playing arcade games or enjoying the thrill of an unfamiliar city. And these scenes provide at least glimmers of respite, or perhaps windows into what life could be if they didn't have to work so hard for bodily autonomy. Eliza Hittman's Never, Rarely, Sometimes Always follows a pregnant teen named Autumn and her cousin Skylar from rural Pennsylvania to New York City. Autumn needs an abortion. Calling Autumn and Skylar's journey an adventure would be disrespectful. It is a laborious journey soiled by grief and lack of sleep. While Autumn and Skylar plan for the trip to take no more than a day, it ends up taking several. The two bounce between clinics after realizing that Autumn is further along in her pregnancy than she was told. Port Authority and the subway become their bed, public restrooms, their shower. The film begins with a clip of Autumn performing an acoustic version of the Exciters' He's Got the Power in a school show with glittery eyeshadow, a pearl necklace, and a hot pink sweater. Autumn appears to be your typical indie teen. It's also no coincidence that Sharon Van Etten plays her mom in the film. In the middle of Autumn's song, her ex-boyfriend yells "slut," causing the audience to snicker. Shortly after Autumn visits her local clinic and finds out she's pregnant, what Autumn decides to do afterwards is so instinctual it caught me off guard. She pierces her nose. Every time I get a piercing, it's because I'm subconsciously longing to feel independent. I can make a decision about my body and have something to show for it. Autumn pierces her nose with a hot safety pin, following a moment in which it feels like her body isn't hers. He's got the power. The pregnancy is just as much or more due to her ex-boyfriend's actions as it is hers, but she's the one that has to carry the baby. It's these moments of understanding that make Never, Rarely, Sometimes Always such a gut-wrenching and incredible film. When Skylar and Autumn realize they didn't budget enough money to take the bus home from New York, Skylar calls up a boy named Jasper, who desperately hit on her on the bus from Pennsylvania to New York. Although Jasper doesn't know the girls are using him, it's clear that he won't hand over the money unless Skylar agrees to hook up. One of the most powerful scenes from the film occurs when Autumn finds Skylar reluctantly making out with Jasper behind a pole and extends her pinky for Skylar to hold while engaging in an act she desperately wants to. resist this moment of quiet solidarity screamed at me and at countless young women who realize at a young age that in this world, submission often feels like the only answer. Not only was the execution of this film excellent, but also its story is incredibly important. Being on the cusp of turning 20, it's not uncommon for me to have conversations about being able to check off that box that says beat teen pregnancy as if it's a disease. The other day, my friend asked, "How many people do you think we know have had abortions, but they just never told anyone?" Much of what gets put into the category of taboo in our society is molded by media exposure. It seems that either you get pregnant as a teen, have a baby, and end up on 16 and pregnant, or you don't get pregnant. What about getting pregnant as a teen and having an abortion? Such a prospect seems largely swept under the rug, as abortions are almost always portrayed in the media as a shameful part of someone's past, if even covered at all. This stigma is even revealed within the film, as Autumn and Skylar don't verbally speak about the abortion much, and instead show mutual support and understanding through small gestures. Never, rarely, sometimes always highlights the trauma that women face while growing up, whether it's being sexualized from a young age or being forced to make decisions about your bodily autonomy even before you fully settled into it. While the plot of this film revolves around abortion, it encapsulates a much larger message about womanhood. Hittman's Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is a piece of work that young women will find easy to identify with, whether we want to or not. Extra information: Eliza Hittman is maybe my favorite American filmmaker right now, working in what is probably my least favorite mode of filmmaking. I honestly don't even know if that's a backhanded compliment or a sincere one. Her preferred aesthetic is indie film 101. Handheld cameras, a shitload of medium shots and medium close-ups, a plot that coalesces so slowly it almost doesn't locate it in unadorned real-world spaces, that aren't sexy in the ordinary movie full of people inarticulately stumbling through their thoughts. Standard issue, purposefully artless naturalism on the Darden Brothers model, in other words. And after a couple of decades watching the style come to dominate American and European serious film, I am pretty confident that it has absolutely nothing new left to say, but the right director can still channel it into something that it makes some striking, honest observations, and Hittman has amply proven herself to be the right filmmaker most recently with Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, a movie that does absolutely everything one assumes it would, and yet manages to be striking and insightful, and in a couple of moments, pretty damn emotionally roying. The film is pared down to the most austere essentials, starting exactly at the beginning, stopping exactly at the end, and giving us basically nothing at all that in any way distracts from the narrative core. 17-year-old Autumn Sidney Flanigan is pregnant, and the small town in Pennsylvania where she lives isn't really equipped to help her get an abortion without her parents finding out. State law requires parental permission for the surgery, so she and her cousin Skylar Talia Ryder pull their resources to take a bus to New York City, where they struggle to stay safe on a budget while Autumn goes to the clinic for a consultation and then a treatment and then an unexpected next-day follow-up treatment that the pair wasn't prepared to deal with. It's as straightforward as message movies get. It's horrible that a teenage girl has to go to these lengths to get a legal medical procedure, and we had better be in a constant state of low-grade terror at what's going to happen to her if she's not constantly on alert for all of the overtly and subtly predatory men haunting the great big city. But it's also not just a message movie. It's a snapshot of a few days in the life of two pointedly ordinary teenagers as they go on their first adult adventure with barely any planning or expectations for what challenges are about to face them. And much of what is best about the film is at the confluence of these two things, little moments that find Autumn and Skylar blindsided and terrified and still managing to scrape through whatever event has befallen them. A fight between the two that begins quietly and ends in total silence, with the reconciliation between the two coming entirely in the form of a little head nod, a close-up of their pinky. Fingers linked in a gesture of solidarity in the face of a bleak, filthy, ugly world. And this is the sort of thing where Hittman's gift for navigating this by-the-books approach to filmmaking really shows up, because she and editor Scott Cummings know just when to go in for those closer angles, punctuating moments that are staged well enough, but really become great because of little accent marks that guide our attention and control the pace of the scenes. And then in the film's very best scene, Hittman goes all the way the other direction, issuing editing at all for a merciless long-take medium close-up of Flanigan fielding medical and personal history questions from a pleasant but detached business-like social worker who asks increasingly intimate questions, always ending in the litany, never, rarely, sometimes always, and Flanigan's face is the whole of the movie for this long scene, first blandly patient, then annoyed, then washed with unspoken pain when the questions cut too close to the bone. Have you been hit by a partner? Have you been pressured into sex? It's the one place where Hittman returns triumphantly to the filmmaking truism she used so persistently in her last film, Beach Rats. Nothing is more cinematic than the human face. Less enthusiastically, this sequence is also the closest we ever come to learning anything about what's going on inside Autumn's head. And this gets us to the film's fairly stark limitations. Beach Rats is a good comparison point. Think, because the two films end up being pretty close in quality for different reasons. That film was all about digging into its protagonist's head, trying to figure out every single thing that's bothering him, why he's making the choices he makes, and understanding his confusion about life and the world, and then it goes to hell in a really messy third act. Never, rarely, sometimes always is entirely objective, focusing monomaniacally on what Autumn and Skylar do, but refusing to operate on any other level than pure observation. This leads to an admirable lack of any melodrama, which I assume is why Hittman took this approach. It makes the film entirely about the ordeal the girls face, without any hint of sensationalism or sentiment staring with clinical anger at the ridiculous effort they are obliged to put in to achieve their single goal. But this comes at a somewhat perilous lack of context, character depth, or even simply drama. The film never transcends the feeling that it's just a long chain of individual scenes which stitch together only because they take place in chronological order. It's the realism thing, of course, but after a while it becomes at least slightly annoying that the film keeps abandoning its most intense emotional material for scenes of the teens just hanging out in New York. Particularly after Autumn's procedure, which appears to have both the physical and emotional impact of a trip to the mailbox. Even that's less frustrating than how little we learn about Autumn. We get little hints in the title scene, and we see just enough of her home life to know how miserable it is, though I would not, from the evidence on screen, be prepared to tell you if the abrasive man in her kitchen is her dad, her stepdad, or her mom's boyfriend. But it's all kind of generic. And so despite the precision with which Hittman and Flanigan depict her behavior is Autumn herself, it's sometimes easy to say what she feels about what's going on, but virtually never what she thinks about it. And this makes her feel less like a character than a prop in a whole movie of props. The closest the film ever comes to depicting something idiosyncratic to have a personality is in its odd opening scene at a talent show where everybody other than Autumn is doing a pastiche of 50s pop culture. For some reason, this has nothing to do with anything that follows. So a more consistent movie than Beach Rats, with a more confidently expressed relationship to the things it's depicting and what it wants us to do with them, but it has less interiority and less specificity. That is to say, it has many moments that feel very specific. Indeed, but they feel specific at the level of, this is what every single 17-year-old girl in this moment would experience in a very detailed way. Not this is what this particular 17-year-old, and C, Perhaps this is in service the film's themes, I cannot say, but it does leave me feeling removed from the film, which comes across as a bit coolly intellectual in ways that don't serve the material. The obvious point of comparison is the Romanian masterpiece 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, which is no less intellectual while being far more expressive. Still, it's a tight piece of filmmaking with a focused, nuanced lead performance, and it enshrines Hittman as a director I will very eagerly follow. Without necessarily expecting to ever love her movies, there's a moment early in The Softly Savage, Never Rarely, sometimes always, in which an adult woman dresses her husband, a grown-ass adult man, in precisely the same way she has. Just dressed her toddler child, coaxing arms into sleeves, etc., with much cheery encouraging of this basic need to ensure that one's physical body is equipped to deal with winter weather. So the good thing is that this shattering movie isn't just pro-women struggling through some tough tattery, it's also anti-useless. Men who make the lives of women so much more burdensome than they need to be. All of this is unspoken subtext in the life of 17-year-old Autumn Sidney Flanigan, who is secretly pregnant and does not. It is also unspoken subtext in how writer-director Eliza Hittman tells Autumn's story, filtered through the eyes of a high schooler who cannot yet quite grasp all the nuanced contexts that have shaped the life she finds herself wading through the muck of. We see the out of it, though, and see, with rage and futile empathy on her behalf, it's Autumn's mom, Sharon Van Etten, for instance, whose husband, Autumn's dad, Ryan Egold, Fathers and Daughters, is like another of her children. Bad enough that mom barely looks old enough to be Autumn's mother, and not because of the usual movie shenanigans that cast two young women in two old roles, because she probably is too young to be Autumn's mother, or would be in a world that gave women solid options over their fertility. We may presume that she herself was a teenaged mom. We may presume that Autumn has seen her mother's struggles and internalized the notion that this is not a life she would choose for herself if she had any other option. We don't know the circumstances by which Autumn has fallen pregnant, and it mostly doesn't matter. She doesn't want to be pregnant, and it is her decision what to do about that, no matter how it happened. But we also glean clues. I will leave them to you to discover that those circumstances may not be of the happiest sort. Autumn's world, our world, is one in which her teen boy peers and the older men with which she must regularly interact are awful excuses for human beings. I stress that nothing we see here is unusual or in any way outside the realm of the that girls and women have to cope with on a daily basis. Behaving in wildly inappropriate ways is just ordinary. There is always a creep who will take whatever advantage he can because he holds the tiniest bit of power over a girl or a woman. There is always a man who doesn't care if a girl or a woman is just barely tolerating his presence, his touch. He will take what he can anyway. It's impossible to believe that boys and men have no idea how often girls and women find them disgusting and repulsive for acting like they are owed our attention or access to our bodies. But either they don't realize this or they just don't care. Yes, Never Rarely, Sometimes Always is an abortion movie. And it is so very essential for the matter-of-fact way in which it depicts Autumn's abortion journey carried out. With the redoubtable support of her cousin and best friend Skylar Talia Ryder, as an easy decision that is difficult to carry out because of all the barriers thrown up at her at every step, some deliberate, some inadvertent. For how Autumn's experience is not tragic or traumatic in and of itself, yet is made overtly and intentionally convoluted by a society that simultaneously sends her mixed signals about female sexuality, castigates her for acting like she owns her own body, and punishes her when she attempts to take responsibility for her own actions, even if those actions have been warped by her cultural programming. Cringe at how Autumn's father throws around words like and easy in such a way that makes it clear he would have little sympathy for his daughter's situation. Double cringe at the reminder that yes, sometimes women are also complicit in making the lives of other women more stressful than they need to be. Extreme cringe at the gentleness with which the abortion clinic counselor asks the tough questions to which Autumn should choose from among the words that make up the title of this film. The questions that highlight, for those who don't already know this, the knotted existence many women are just barely surviving. No, never, rarely, sometimes, always isn't about abortion. It's about the constant low-level abuse and denigration that girls and women endure, the brutal, heartbreaking aloneness that is only briefly alleviated by solidarity with some other girls and women. This movie is about the garbage that gets piled upon girls and women, utterly mundane but usually ignored, often covert. Men have no freaking idea about much of it. Plenty of women know but would like not to. Hear it is look at it, see it. Autumn is a remarkable character, unforgettable for her pragmatism and her resilience. Newcomer Flanigan has the tender vulnerability and pragmatic steel of a young Mary Elizabeth Winstead. But ask yourself why such a young woman must be so strong and so almost entirely on her own. Ask yourself why our world must treat girls and women this way. Don't let yourself off the hook as you reach for answers. This film, directed by Eliza, Hittman, written by Eliza Hittman, produced by Adele, Romanski, Sara Murphy. Starring Sidney Flanigan, Talia Ryder, Théodore, Pellerin, Ryan Eagold, Sharon, Venetton cinematography, Helen Levart, edited by Scott Cummings, music by Julia Halter Production Companies, Focus Features, BBC Films, Pastel Productions. Tango Entertainment, Mutressa Movies Cineac, distributed by Focus Features. United States Universal Pictures International, release dates January 24th, 2020 in Sundance, March 13th, 2020 in United States, running time 101 minutes. Countries: United States, United Kingdom, language English, budget less than $5. Million box office, 891,027. So guys, this is the review of Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.